I checked one tiny box on a blood donation form, just like everyone does. 6 months later, a doctor I'd never met called me directly and said, "This is about you, and it could save my daughter's life, or destroy hers." My name is Rachel Eskew. I'm 38. My bathroom faucet drips every 4 seconds. I count them when I can't afford to think about anything else. My 8-year-old daughter sets her own alarm for dialysis. My husband left 7 words on the kitchen table and never came back. But that checkbox? It wasn't anonymous, it wasn't harmless, and it gave them the right to come for my daughter. For the next 15 years. Pause. Jeongthap. Don't scroll, like if you've ever signed something without reading it. Subscribe and comment. Would you check the box? Now, let me tell you how one tick almost cost everything. Let me start with the numbers, because the numbers are the only thing that were honest with me that year. $14,800 every month. That's what it cost to keep Lily alive. Not comfortable, not healthy, alive. 3 dialysis sessions a week at Allegheny Children's Renal Center, each one 4 hours long, each one costing more than I made in a week at the pharmacy. I know because I did the math every single night, the way some people count sheep. Except the math never put me to sleep. I filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in March of 2024, $94,000 in debt. Student loans I'd taken out to get my phlebotomy certification. Credit cards we'd used when the clinic closed. Medical bills that had been growing since Lily's diagnosis 8 months before. The bankruptcy attorney charged $800 up front. I paid him in cash I'd been keeping in an envelope taped to the back of the bathroom mirror, because James had access to our bank accounts, and I had learned by then to be careful. The apartment in Beachview was $680 a month, utilities included. Room 2B, ground floor, window facing the parking lot. The walls were the color of old mustard. The carpet had a stain near the radiator that I covered with a towel from the first day and never moved. There was a mini fridge, a 2-burner stove, and a fold-out table I used as a desk, a dining table, and sometimes a bed when I fell asleep going over Lily's billing statements. The bathroom faucet dripped every 4 seconds. I know because I counted. It was the kind of thing you start noticing when silence gets expensive, when distraction costs money you don't have, and all you can do is sit in the dark and listen to time passing 4 seconds at a time. On the refrigerator, I'd taped a piece of paper, handwritten, the number 14,800, underlined twice in red pen. Below it, the number for the billing department at Allegheny Children's. Below that, in smaller writing so Lily wouldn't read it if she ever came over. UNOS ranking? Number 312. Average weight, blood type B positive, 5.2 years. 5.2 years. Lily was 8. I want you to do that math yourself. My phlebotomy certification had lapsed in January. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Not because I'd violated any protocol or lost my license for cause. It expired because the annual renewal cost $300 and required 20 continuing education hours. And I had $214 in my checking account and was working the overnight shift at a CVS on Banksville Road from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 3 nights a week, and then driving directly to Allegheny Children's to sit with Lily during her morning session because she didn't like to be alone when the machine started. $300, 20 hours. I had neither. So the certification sat in my kitchen drawer, expired, next to a parking validation stamp from the hospital and a coupon for 10% off paper towels. I still knew everything it had taught me. The knowledge doesn't expire. Only the paperwork does. In November, I started donating blood. Not for any noble reason. Vitalant on Baum Boulevard paid $50 a session, and I needed the money for gas. That's the whole story of why I was there. $50, gas money. I went 4 times between September and November. The first 3 times, nothing happened. I gave blood, I got my $50, I drove to CVS, I started my shift. The 4th time was different. But before I tell you about the 4th time, I need to tell you about Lily. She was 8 years old and she had been on dialysis for 14 months. Hemolytic uremic syndrome, which sounds clinical and distant until you understand what it means. A bacterial infection triggered a cascade that attacked her kidneys, and her kidneys, the kidneys she was supposed to have for the next 80 years, were functioning at 11% of normal capacity. 11%. She was 8 years old and her kidneys were working at 11%. She had learned to read her own fluid intake chart. She knew the names of all her medications, the dosages, the timing. She set 3 alarms on the small pink alarm clock on her hospital nightstand, one for her morning medication, one for the start of dialysis, one for the afternoon check-in with the nursing staff. She set those alarms herself because, she told me once, she didn't want to wake me up. She was 8. One evening in October, she looked up from her chart. She was doing her homework on the tray table, kidney function worksheet and long division side by side, and she said, "Mom, when I get better, can we go to the aquarium?" I said yes. Of course I said yes. "Promise?" she said. I said I'd put it in writing, and I did. I wrote it on the back of the billing statement that had arrived that morning. The one for $14,800. I wrote, "I promise. Aquarium. You and me." And I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket where I kept things I needed to remember. She didn't need to know which piece of paper I wrote it on. UNOS ranking, 312. I had memorized that number the way you memorize the combination to a lock that holds everything you love. Wednesday, November 13th, 9:17 in the morning. I had just finished my overnight shift at CVS. 8 hours of stocking shelves, running register, answering questions about cold medicine. I smelled like floor cleaner and bad coffee. My Civic had 162,000 miles on it and a heat issue I'd been ignoring for 3 weeks. I drove to Vitalant on Baum Boulevard because it was on the way home and I needed the $50 before rent cleared on Friday. I'd been here 3 times before. I knew the intake process by memory. I signed in, took a number, filled out the form. At the bottom of the form, a small checkbox. I consent to share anonymized data for medical research purposes. I checked it. I didn't read it. I'd checked it 3 times before without reading it. Most people do. It's at the bottom of the page. The font is small, and you're tired, and there's a number in your hand, and you're just trying to get through the next step. I checked it and moved on. The technician who called my number was a young woman, maybe 25. She looked at my name on the form, then looked up. "Rachel Eskew? Did you work at UPMC Shadyside Drawing Labs?" "7 years," I said, "before the satellite clinic closed." She smiled. "I thought I recognized the veins. Best antecubital presentation I've seen all week." This is phlebotomist small talk. We talk about veins the way mechanics talk about engines. I sat down, rolled up my sleeve, and looked at the wall while she prepped the site. Old habit. I never watched my own draws. It felt redundant. The needle went in. I felt nothing. She was good. She labeled the collection tube and walked it to the processing station across the room, slid it into the preliminary scan machine, and waited. I was reading the laminated poster about iron-rich foods when I heard the machine beep. Not the normal beep, a different one, 2 short tones instead of 1. I'd heard that sound before. It meant the preliminary panel had flagged something for secondary review. I looked up. The technician was staring at the screen. Then she picked up the collection tube and looked at it, which no one does. The tube is a tube. Looking at it tells you nothing. And then she put it back down and took out her phone. Not the desk phone, her personal phone. She walked into the back room. In 11 years of medical work, I never saw a collection technician leave the floor mid-session to make a personal call about a sample. Never. I sat in that chair and I kept my face neutral and I thought, something is wrong with my sample or something is wrong with their protocol, and neither of those things is nothing. She came back 3 minutes later with another woman, older, lab coat, no name badge visible. They stood at the processing station and spoke quietly. I caught 2 words through the ambient noise of the waiting room. HLA markers, human leukocyte antigen markers. The proteins on the surface of cells that determine immunological compatibility. In 11 years of processing lab work, I had run HLA panels hundreds of times. I knew exactly what that phrase meant in a clinical context. I knew it wasn't routine. The woman in the lab coat looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked across the room at me. I looked back. "Is there a problem with my sample?" I asked. She crossed the room. Calm, professional. The kind of calm that takes practice. "No problem at all, Ms. Eskew. We just need to run a secondary confirmation panel, Completely standard. It just takes a bit longer. Can you wait? Of course, I said. She went back to the station. The technician avoided my eyes for the rest of the session. I left Vigilant at 10:45, drove home, ate half a sandwich standing over the sink, set my alarm for 4 p.m. so I could be at Allegheny Children's by 5. At 2:30 my phone rang. Unknown number, area code 412, Pittsburgh local. Ms. Eskew, my name is Dr. Alan Freed. I'm a transplant nephrologist affiliated with Allegheny's Research Coordination Office. I was hoping to speak with you in person, tomorrow morning, if that's possible. I held the phone and said nothing for a moment. Doctors don't call blood donors directly. That's not how the system works. Every contact goes through a research coordinator, a buffer between the clinical team and the participant, specifically designed so that no donor ever feels pressured by a physician. It's not just etiquette, it's protocol. It exists because someone at some point decided that a doctor calling you directly was a form of pressure. Dr. Alan Freed had called me directly. Is this about my daughter's case? I asked. No, Ms. Eskew, he said. This is about you. I hung up the phone and stood at my kitchen window for a long time, looking at the parking lot below. Someone was in a hurry. The question was why. Thursday, November 14th, 10:07 in the morning. Tang Tam, Allegheny Research Coordination, Room Tam Cham Lehai. No hospital beds, no equipment, just a conference table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard with nothing written on it, and 2 men who stood up when I walked in. Dr. Alan Freed. 50s, careful eyes, the kind of stillness that comes from delivering difficult information professionally for a long time. He introduced himself and shook my hand. The second man didn't introduce himself immediately. He sat back down and opened a laptop. On the screen, facing me, a document header. Favre Biosystems AG. Confidential Donor Screening Report. SQ Rachel M. I sat down. Are you familiar with bioprinting technology, Ms. SQ? Dr. Freed asked. In general terms, I said, printing biological tissue using cellular scaffolding. They've been doing it with cartilage and skin for years. Organ scale is more recent. He nodded. The second man typed something.
杀鸡
Favre Biosystems AG is a Geneva-based firm that has been developing kidney bioprinting for 6 years. Their technology doesn't use donor organs. It uses a biological scaffold, a cellular template, to grow a compatible organ in a laboratory environment. What kind of template? An HLA-matched cellular profile. Human leukocyte antigen, the immunological signature that determines whether a transplanted organ is accepted or rejected. Mr. Favre's immune system is highly sensitized. Standard donors fail at a rejection rate of over 94%. A bioprinted organ built from a matched HLA scaffold could bypass that entirely. I listened. I kept my hands flat on the table, which is something I do when I need to think without showing it. My panel flagged yesterday, I said. Your HLA profile is exceptionally rare, approximately 1 in 180,000 in the general population. We've been searching for 6 years. 2 previous candidates were identified, but were medically unsuitable for other reasons. And I'm the third. You're the third. I looked at the document on the laptop screen. My name, my date of birth, my sample ID from Vigilant, dated November 13th. What exactly are you asking me to do? Dr. Freed leaned forward slightly. We're asking for your participation in a biological sampling protocol. Blood draws, a minor tissue biopsy, nothing surgical. The samples would be used to develop the scaffold template for Mr. Favre's treatment. And in exchange, the second man, the one with the laptop, placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. Favre Foundation is prepared to cover your daughter's full treatment costs for the duration of the 12-month evaluation period. $2.4 million, held in escrow through a domestic instrument, First Allegheny Correspondent Trust. Allegheny Children's Billing has already confirmed they'll accept the arrangement. $2.4 million. He said it the way you'd read a serial number. Flat, factual. The number itself was supposed to do the work, and it did. I felt it land somewhere beneath my ribs, like a key finding a lock it was made for. 2.4 million. 14,800 a month covered. Lily's chart, Lily's alarms, the aquarium. I did not pick up the envelope. How did you find me? I asked. UNOS doesn't share HLA data with private companies. Your data was flagged through the voluntary donor registry at Vitalant. When you registered, you consented to share anonymized data for medical research. The checkbox at the bottom of the form. The algorithm in this registry was updated 6 months ago, he continued. Updated specifically to flag the profile we were looking for. Your sample triggered it yesterday. 6 months ago. I had donated 3 times in those 6 months. The algorithm had been watching the entire time, and I had walked past it and past it and past it, and then on the 4th try, something in my blood said the word they needed to hear. If I decline, I said, then the conversation ends here. You are under no obligation. You have the right to independent legal counsel, independent medical consultation, and the right to refuse at any stage of the process. I stood up. I took the envelope. I did not open it. I'll be in touch, I said. I rode the elevator down alone. 14 floors. I looked at the envelope in my hands, the weight of it, the unremarkable white of it. And I thought about Lily setting her alarm 3 times a week, so she wouldn't wake me up. $2.4 million. I thought about the checkbox at the bottom of the form. I thought about the word consent. I got home at noon. I put the envelope on the fold-out table, made coffee, drank it standing up, looking at the envelope the way you look at something you're not sure is safe to open. At 7:45 p.m., my phone rang. Columbus, Ohio area code. James. 9 months of silence. Not a call, not a text, not a card to Lily on her birthday in March. 9 months. And then, 7:45 p.m. on the exact day I'd been offered $2.4 million in escrow. I answered. Hey, he said, it's me. I know. I heard something's going on with you. Something big. Who told you? Nathan, he said. He works at PNC on 5th Avenue. He saw your name on some trust paperwork that came through today, a correspondent transaction. He called me. Nathan Calloway, James's younger brother, loan officer at PNC Bank Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is not a large city. The banking community is smaller than people think. First Allegheny Correspondent Trust had established the payment guarantee, and the paperwork had crossed Nathan's desk, and Nathan had seen the name Rachel M. Eskew and had called his brother before the ink was dry. Nathan shouldn't be discussing client documents, I said. Rachel, is this about Lily, or is it about the money? A long silence. Not the silence of someone thinking. The silence of someone who has already decided and is trying to find a way to say it that sounds different. I thought so, I said. Good night, James. I still have parental rights, Rachel. I stopped. I let that sentence sit in the air for exactly as long as it needed to. Then I said, yes, you do. And I hung up. I stood in the kitchen of room 2B, looking at the fold-out table, looking at the white envelope on top of it, and I thought about parental rights. James had them. On paper, he had them. He had exercised them 0 times in the 14 months since Lily's diagnosis. Not once, not a phone call to her doctor, not a copay, not a parking fee. But the rights themselves were intact, because rights don't expire the way certifications do. Only the actions do. I picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside, 1-page letterhead, Favre Biosystems a GX. Rachel M. Eskew, letter of intent. A letter of intent is not a contract. It's a handshake in legal language, a document that says both parties are willing to have the conversation, with no binding obligation on either side. I knew the terminology. I'd seen letters of intent before, in the early days of the clinic where I worked, when they were negotiating equipment leases. I read it twice. All the major terms were present: evaluation period, compensation structure, medical protocol, right to withdraw, independent counsel. One thing was missing. I didn't know what it was yet. I just felt it. The gap where something should have been. The way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue before you consciously register that it's gone. I called Oliver Stanhope's number in the morning. Friday, November 15th, 8:50 a.m. Oliver Stanhope answered on the second ring. Philadelphia area code. His voice was the voice of someone who had been managing complicated situations for a long time, measured, courteous, without warmth or coldness. The voice of a man whose job was to be precise. He explained the process. 3 stages. First, medical screening, conducted by an independent physician of my choosing, verified by Favre Biosystems clinical team. Second, psychological evaluation, standard for any extended research participation protocol. Third, legal review and clearance, during which I would have full right to independent counsel. And if I withdraw at any stage, I asked? The coverage is contingent on completing the 12-month evaluation period. Withdrawal terminates the agreement. What if Lily's situation changes, if she receives a UNOS match during the evaluation period? A brief pause. Shorter than a beat, but I caught it. That scenario is addressed in Section 19 of the full agreement. A material change in the donor's medical situation allows for renegotiation of terms, not automatic termination, renegotiation. The distinction matters, I said. It does, he agreed. I'll want to review the full agreement before I sign anything, including Section 19. Of course, I'll send the complete document through a secure transfer, 67 pages. And regarding the payment mechanism, you mentioned a correspondent trust. First, Allegheny Correspondent Trust, a domestic U.S. instrument. Allegheny Children's Billing has confirmed acceptance of the payment guarantee. The funds are real, Ms. Eskew. They're not contingent on anything except your participation in the evaluation. I wrote down Section 19 material change, renegotiation, not termination. I underlined it. I called Patricia Holt that afternoon. She had a small office on Forbes Avenue, second floor, above a dry cleaner. She specialized in biomedical contracts. Her rate was $350 an hour, which I did not have, and she agreed to defer payment after I explained the situation, which I did in exactly 4 sentences. She downloaded the 67 pages. We met the following Tuesday. I sat across from her in a chair that had a small tear in the fabric near the armrest, and I drank coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes before she poured it, and I watched her read. She was a fast reader. She turned pages without expression, which is either a good sign or a very bad one depending on what they're reading. She finished in just under 2 hours. She set the document down. She picked up her red pen. She turned to page 43 and drew a single underline beneath a section heading. Then she looked up at me. "Rachel," she said, "who else is in your immediate biological family?" That question had nothing to do with the HLA profile of my kidneys, and Patricia Holt knew that I knew that. She pushed the document across the desk. "Read this section," she said. "Read it slowly. Before I tell you what Section 14C said, I want you to understand something. I had spent 11 years processing lab samples. I had read HLA panels, surgical consent forms, research participation agreements. I read medical language the way most people read plain English. When Patricia pushed that page across the desk, I already knew, somewhere below conscious thought, that what was on it was going to cost me a night of sleep. If you've listened this far, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And don't go anywhere. Section 14C. Page 43 of 67. I'll read it to you exactly as it appeared. In the event that donor's biological material is utilized in the bioprinting process, Favre Biosystems AG retains the right to request additional biological samples from donor or donor's direct biological descendants for quality assurance and longitudinal calibration purposes at any time within a period of 15 years following the initial sample collection date, subject to reasonable compensation as determined solely by Favre Biosystems AG. I read it once. I read it again. I put the page down on the desk and looked at the window behind Patricia's head. Outside, a bus was pulling away from the stop on Forbes. A woman in a yellow coat was chasing it. Then I picked up the page and read it a third time, slowly, the way I used to read lab values that didn't make sense, starting from the beginning, taking each element apart. Donor's direct biological descendants. Lily. Longitudinal calibration purposes. I set the page down again. "Patricia," I said, "walk me through the HLA inheritance mechanism in plain language." She nodded. HLA haplotypes are inherited. A biological parent passes approximately 50% of their HLA profile to each child. If your profile is rare, 1 in 180,000, there's a meaningful probability that Lily carries the same or a closely related haplotype, especially given that HUS in children sometimes occurs in individuals with specific immunological profiles. Longitudinal calibration, I said again. A scaffold built from a single biological time point has limits. If you can track the same genetic line across multiple time points, across 2 generations, across decades, you can calibrate the scaffold's long-term performance. You can see how the profile ages, how it responds to disease, how it develops from childhood to adulthood. I looked at the page. I'm time point 1, I said. Lily is time point 2. Yes. And in 15 years, they retain the right to request additional samples from Lily at any time, for any calibration purpose they define, for compensation they determine. Lily was 8 years old. 8 plus 15 is 23. They wanted access to my daughter from the age of 8 to the age of 23. Her entire adolescence, her entire early adulthood, every immunological development, every biological change, they wanted the right to sample it, to study it, to build their research on it. They hadn't asked Lily, they had asked me. And they had asked me at the exact moment when I had nothing left. When my certification had lapsed, and my husband was gone, and my checking account had $214, and my daughter was number 312 on a 5-year waiting list. They had asked me to sign on behalf of a child who couldn't consent, in exchange for the money to keep that child alive. I kept my voice very even. If I wanted to challenge this clause, I said, what would that look like? Patricia folded her hands. Pennsylvania courts have strong minor consent protections. The clause as written would face significant scrutiny if Favre attempted to enforce it against Lily before she reached legal age. You could potentially challenge it. Potentially, how long would that take? Litigation, 2 to 3 years minimum. And cost? Upward of $80,000 in legal fees. I looked at my hands on the desk. 2 to 3 years, $80,000, during which Favre Foundation could freeze the escrow pending dispute resolution, during which Lily's coverage would stop. I had $214 in my checking account. I did not have 2 to 3 years. I did not have $80,000. This was not a legal problem. This was a mathematics problem. I drove home and parked in the lot outside room 2B and sat in the car for 40 minutes without going inside. I didn't cry. I've said that before and I want to be clear. This isn't me performing strength. I just didn't cry. I was too focused to cry. Instead, I took out a piece of paper and wrote 4 questions. 1. Why was Section 14C not included in the letter of intent? 2. Who inherits Favre Biosystems rights under Section 14C if Favre dies within the 15-year period? 3. What legal mechanism governs reasonable compensation as determined solely by Favre Biosystems? 4. And this one I didn't write down. This one I kept in my head, where it was harder for anyone else to read. I would ask question 4 directly, to Favre himself. I went inside, I made tea, I spread all 67 pages across the floor of room 2B. I started from page 1. What I'm about to tell you is something I could only do because of 11 years of medical work. Not because I was brilliant, because I was trained. There's a difference, and the difference matters. I read contracts the way I used to read lab reports, looking for anomalies, things that don't fit the surrounding pattern, values that fall outside the expected range. Sections 1 through 13 were standard for a bioprinting research agreement. Aggressive, Favre's legal team had pushed every clause to its outermost boundary, but structurally standard. I'd seen similar language in research participation agreements at the clinic. Section 14 was different, not just in content, in structure. The syntax was slightly different from the surrounding sections. The clause numbering within the section was inconsistent, and the language, longitudinal calibration purposes, appeared nowhere else in the 67 pages. It had been added, not drafted alongside the rest. Added. I opened my laptop, found the PDF Stanhope had sent through the secure transfer portal, right-clicked on the file, selected Properties. File created November 8, 2024. Last modified November 9th, 2024. November 9th. I had walked into Vitalent on November 13th. The contract had been modified 4 days before I walked through that door. 4 days before the technician ran my panel. 4 days before the two-tone beep. 4 days before she left the room to make a call on her personal phone. In lab work, we call this a pre-labeled sample. The tube already has your name on it before the draw. It doesn't always mean something is wrong, but it always means someone already knew. They didn't find me on November 13th. They found me before that. And November 13th was simply the day they allowed me to find out. I sat on the floor of room 2B at 2 in the morning, surrounded by 67 pages of contract, and I felt something settle into place in my chest. Not fear exactly, something colder and more useful than fear. I opened my email. I typed Patricia's address. Subject line: We need to talk about the timeline. I attached a screenshot of the PDF properties. I hit send. The timestamp on the sent email was 2:17 a.m. I didn't sleep. If you're still listening, here's what I want you to know. I didn't have money. I didn't have a lawyer on retainer. I had a lapsed certification and a fold-out table and 11 years of knowing how to read what's in front of me. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened when I got on a plane to Geneva, because the contract they had written assumed I hadn't read page 43. They were wrong. Oliver Stanhope called on Wednesday morning to propose a meeting in Geneva for final review of the agreement. I said yes. I asked who would cover travel. Favre Foundation covers all participant travel costs as part of the research protocol, Stanhope said. Standard practice. I called Patricia. Take it, she said immediately. Research sponsors covering participant travel is completely standard. It creates no legal obligation, and Rachel, they need you there more than you need to be there. Remember that. I booked the flight, middle seat, because that was what was available in the price range. I hadn't been on a plane since 2019. I packed one change of clothes and the 67 pages of contract in a manila folder that I carried onto the plane as my personal item. Geneva, December. The Favre Biosystems offices were not what I'd imagined. No marble lobbies, no glass towers. A converted building near the Rhone, 3 floors, clean lines, the smell of filtered air and equipment. More laboratory than corporation, screens everywhere, data. Oliver Stanhope met me in the lobby. Handshake, no smile. Not unfriendly, just precise. He led me to a conference room on the 2nd floor. Edouard Favre was already there, 72 years old, seated in a wheelchair, smaller than his photographs. A portable dialysis unit hummed quietly beside his chair, the kind designed for mobility, the kind that means someone needs treatment and refuses to stop working because of it. He looked at me when I entered the room with the clear, assessing gaze of a man who had spent his life looking at things that other people couldn't see. He was dying in the careful, slow way that kidney failure allows. He knew it. I knew it. We both knew the other knew it. Ms. Eskew, he said, thank you for coming. His English was precise, French accent, but the grammar was immaculate. The English of someone who had used it professionally for decades. Mr. Favre, I said. I sat down across from him. I have 4 questions. He looked at the manila folder I set on the table. Then he looked at me. Of course, he said. I opened the folder. I put the 4 handwritten questions face up on the table between us. First question, why was Section 14C not included in the letter of intent? Favre glanced at Stanhope. Stanhope answered. Legal risk assessment was still ongoing when the letter of intent was issued. The clause was added during final contract drafting, standard procedure. Standard procedure would be to notify me of material additions before requesting I travel internationally to sign, I said. But let's continue. Second question. Who inherits Favre Biosystems rights under Section 14? C. If Mr. Favre dies within the 15-year term. Favre answered this one himself. The Foundation. All research rights and obligations transfer to the Favre Foundation for biomedical research upon my death. The Foundation has independent governance. And who controls the Foundation's decisions regarding Section 14C after that transfer? The board. How many board members? 7. None of whom my daughter has ever met. A silence. Third question. What legal mechanism determines reasonable compensation as determined solely by Favre Biosystems? Stanhope pulled out a document. Appendix C. He walked me through the compensation schedule. Tiered rates based on sample type, collection frequency, and research phase. The numbers were not unreasonable on their face. What was unreasonable was the word solely. Solely means no negotiation. Solely means they set the price and you accept it or you are in breach. I made a note in the margin. Then I closed the folder. The 4th question wasn't on the paper. I looked at Edouard Favre directly, not at Stanhope, at the man in the wheelchair with the dialysis machine running beside him. Mr. Favre, I said, if your technology works, and I believe it will, how many patients could benefit from it annually? He didn't hesitate. Conservative estimate, 50,000, globally. Patients with sensitized immune systems who currently have no viable transplant options. 50,000, I repeated. Per year, once the calibration is complete and the protocol is scaled. I nodded. I looked at my hands on the table for a moment, then I looked back up. And how many of those 50,000 patients, I said, will know that the foundational research was built on a clause that a mother signed without fully understanding what it meant for her child? The room was very quiet. The dialysis machine hummed. Favre looked at me for 6 seconds, I counted. Ms. Eskew, I'm not finished. You're a scientist. You believe in data. So here is a data point you may not have accounted for. I am the only person in this room who has read Section 14C and understood exactly what it means for a child who cannot consent to it herself. That is not a legal argument. That is a fact. And I think you know that fact changes the equation. Another silence, longer this time. What do you want? Favre asked. I want Section 14C rewritten, and I want it done before I leave Geneva. Stanhope shifted in his chair. Ms. Eskew, renegotiating a clause of this complexity requires. I opened my laptop. On the screen, a video call, already connected. Patricia Holt, Forbes Avenue, Pittsburgh. She was sitting at her desk with a legal pad and a cup of coffee. She's been on mute for the last 20 minutes, I said. Mr. Stanhope, shall we begin? 4 hours. That's how long it took. Patricia led. She was measured, methodical, and utterly without drama. The best kind of lawyer for this kind of room. She didn't raise her voice once. Section 14, C, as written, cannot be enforced against a minor in Pennsylvania without a court-appointed guardian ad litem review. Any attempt to collect samples from Lily before she reaches legal age without that process would expose Favre Biosystems to significant liability in U.S. courts. Stanhope, the agreement is governed by Swiss law. Lily lives in Pittsburgh, I said. Any sample collection would occur in Pittsburgh. You know which jurisdiction controls Mr. Stanhope? He did know. That was why the pause before his answer was exactly half a second too long. He looked at Favre. Favre looked at me. Then he looked at Stanhope. Rewrite it, he said. 2 words. No elaboration. The words of a scientist who has just been shown that his data is incomplete and is adjusting accordingly. Stanhope began typing. Patricia walked him through the requirements line by line. I sat and watched the process and drank water from a glass that someone had placed in front of me at some point, I don't remember when. And I thought about the 4 questions I had written on a piece of paper in room 2B at 2 in the morning, and how question 4 had been the only one that mattered. My phone buzzed on the table, James, 3 times. I turned it face down. At 6:47 p.m. Geneva time, Stanhope printed the revised document. Section 14C revised was 4 lines. The original had been 8. It said, Favre Biosystems. AG may, upon Lily Eskew reaching the age of 18, extend a formal invitation for voluntary research participation, subject to her independent, informed consent, with full right of refusal, with compensation terms to be negotiated separately at that time. No automatic access, no request rights before age 18, no unilateral compensation determination, and, at my insistence, and Patricia's drafting, an amendment to Section 19 if Lily received a UNUS donor match during the evaluation period, I retained the right to invoke the material change clause to terminate the coverage contingency independently, without terminating the research agreement itself. Favre kept the scientific rights. I kept the exit. I read the revised document twice. Patricia read it from Pittsburgh. 30 seconds of silence. Sign it, she said. I signed it at 6:47 p.m. Not Lily's name, mine. Only mine. That was the only thing I needed. January 8th, 2025. Email from Allegheny Children's Billing Department. 6:14 in the morning. I was in the CVS parking lot before my shift. I read it on my phone in the dark. Dear Ms. Eskew, we are pleased to confirm that the payment guarantee from First Allegheny Correspondent Trust on behalf of Favre Foundation has been accepted and processed. Coverage for patient Lily Eskew is now active. All scheduled treatments through the evaluation period will be billed directly to the trust. I sat in the parking lot for exactly 4 minutes. I know because the shift started at 6:30 and I had to be inside by then. Then I went to work. In March, I paid $300 and enrolled in 20 hours of continuing education. The same $300 I hadn't had in January of the previous year. The certification renewal came through in 3 weeks. I put it in the kitchen drawer next to the parking stamp and the coupon, and this time it wasn't expired. The coverage also meant something else. Before, Lily's UNOS file had been incomplete. There were 3 specialized immunological assessments that her file required, tests that cost $800 each, that I had never been able to afford. $2,400. I'd been told they were recommended but not required, and I'd put them off the way you put off everything that isn't immediately keeping someone alive. In January, with coverage active, we scheduled all 3. The results went into her file. For the first time, her UNOS application was complete. Her physician submitted the full updated file for expedited review in February. I want to be clear about what this means. Her ranking didn't jump because her health improved. It moved because her paperwork was finally whole, because the system finally had everything it needed to evaluate her properly, because $2,400 in tests had been standing between my daughter and a complete application for over a year. $2,400. I had been so focused on the $14,800 every month that I had missed the $2,400 that was blocking the door. On April 14th, 2025, Dr. Freed called. Not about Favre. Ms. Eskew, we have a UNOS match for Lily. I was in the CVS stockroom. I had a box of cold medicine in one hand. I put it down on the shelf. Carefully. The way you put something down when your hands aren't quite steady. When? I said. 2 weeks. I called Patricia from the parking lot. Lily has a match, I said. I'm invoking Section 19. I'll draft the notice today. Favre Foundation retains the research rights. You retain your exit. Yes. Rachel. Yes. You did this right. I didn't answer that. I'm still not sure what the right answer would have been. 3 weeks later, James's attorney sent an email. Dear Ms. Eskew, our client Mr. James Calloway wishes to exercise his parental rights regarding all medical decisions pertaining to Lily Eskew. Given the recent significant changes in Lily's care situation, Mr. Calloway believes his active participation is both appropriate and necessary at this time. Recent significant changes. James had not called Lily's doctor in 14 months. He had not attended a single dialysis session. He had contributed $0 to her care. Not a copay, not a parking fee, not the $2,400 for the 3 tests that had been sitting between her and a complete UNOS file. He had not sent her a birthday card. But he had heard about the match, and he had heard about the Favre Foundation coverage, and now he wanted to participate. Patricia's response was 1 page. It documented 9 months of no contact. 0 financial contribution over 14 months. 0 attendance at medical appointments. It requested documentation of James's active participation in Lily's care prior to this letter as a prerequisite for any discussion of expanded involvement. James did not reply. Some things don't need a dramatic ending. Some things end with a page of facts and a silence that says everything the facts don't need to. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. Like and subscribe if this story meant something to you. The ending is shorter than you might expect, but it's the only part that matters. Lily's surgery was in May. I won't describe the waiting room because every waiting room during surgery is the same, and none of them are something you want to hear about. I'll just tell you that it was 5 hours and 40 minutes, and that I drank 3 cups of coffee I didn't taste, and that at some point, a volunteer handed me a blanket I didn't need, and I took it anyway because it gave my hands something to do. She came through. 3 weeks of recovery, then careful walks down the hospital corridor, then home. A new apartment, not Beachview. 1 bedroom, a proper kitchen, a window that looked out at a small square of grass rather than a parking lot. Rent was higher. I could manage it. In May, on a Saturday, I drove Lily to the Pittsburgh Aquarium. She wore a blue jacket and her hair in 2 braids, and she walked through the entrance under her own power, which I had not taken for granted since the previous August, and did not take for granted now. We stood in front of the large tank, the main exhibit, the one with the sharks and the rays and the slow drift of everything moving through blue-lit water. And Lily pressed both hands against the glass. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned to me. Mom. Yeah, baby. Are you okay? I looked at her. 8 years old. Braids. Both hands still touching the glass. Her eyes on my face, checking. I'm okay, Lily, I said. I'm really okay. And that was the first time in 14 months that those words were completely true. Section 14. C. Revised is in a folder in my filing cabinet. Favre Biosystems continues its research. When Lily turns 18, if she wants to, if she chooses to, if she decides it's worth her time and her body and her consideration, she will have a conversation. With full information, with independent counsel if she wants it, with the right to say no for any reason or no reason at all. That's what I fought for. Not to stop the research, not to punish Favre. I meant it when I said I hope his technology saves 50,000 people a year. I meant every word of that. I fought for the right of my daughter to be the one who decides. James hasn't called. The certification is current. I'm back at a clinic, not UPMC Shadyside, a smaller practice in Squirrel Hill, but the work is the same. I draw blood. I label tubes. I read panels. I know what the two-tone beep means when the machine flags something unusual. $300. That's all it cost me to get my certification back. The same $300 I didn't have in January of the previous year. The number is so small in retrospect that it almost makes me laugh. Almost. There's no miracle at the end of this story. There's no windfall, no transformation, no moment where everything became easy. What there is, a girl standing in front of a tank full of sharks with her hands on the glass, watching something large and beautiful move through the water, alive. And a piece of paper in a filing cabinet that has her name on it, but only in the place where she'll one day put it herself. I checked a box without reading it. Most people do. Read the boxes. That's the story. If it stayed with you, like, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.